All right, so how's the demand curve derived? Well, we already saw that, right? We saw that it's derived by looking at the fact that if a consumer is optimizing, they equalize the marginal utility per dollar spent on every item, and when there's a price change, that changes that equality, and they shift their consumption away from the relatively more expensive goods towards the relatively cheaper good, and the price change also changes their real income. So we need to keep in mind that there are a lot of things that we're holding constant, right? So we're assuming that their income isn't changing, their tastes and preferences aren't changing, expectations aren't changing, and also that the prices of other goods aren't changing, right? So we're assuming all those things, which we learned already in chapter 3, and then we're just looking at the price change of one good and how that changes the consumer's quantity demanded. All right, we're going to wrap up this section with an interesting paradox called the diamond water paradox. So the paradox is water, which is essential for life, very important, very valuable, is incredibly cheap in terms of its price, and diamonds, which are not needed for life, don't have a lot of useful, practical uses, are incredibly expensive. So why is that? This thing that we need for life, it's a necessity, is cheap. And these things that we don't need, diamonds, are really expensive. So what is it? Why is that the case? Well, we have to think about the fact that it's not just demand that determines price, right? Because what we're conflating here, what we're confusing is value and price. They're not the same thing, right? Water is very valuable, but its price is very low. Diamonds are not that valuable, as it turns out, but their price is really high. So what we're talking about, we're focusing. The paradox focuses on the demand side, but we also need to remember that price is determined by an equilibrium between supply and demand, right? So we also need to think about the supply side. Well, as it turns out, there's a lot of water. The supply of water on the planet Earth is huge, right? It's like 75% of the Earth is covered in water. So there's a huge supply of water. On the other hand, the supply of diamonds is very low, right? So we can see that here in this graph, why it's really not a paradox, right? So the fact that water is very valuable to consumers is illustrated in the fact that the demand for water is much higher than the demand for diamonds, right? So that's what we were thinking about at first, is the fact that water is very valuable, so the demand is high. Diamonds aren't as valuable for life, and so the demand for diamonds is low. But then we see, okay, well, to get to price, we also need to include supply. The supply of water is very high. The supply of diamonds is very low, and that's where you get these equilibrium prices, with the price of diamonds being incredibly high and the price of water being incredibly low. Okay, so that's a fun little thought experiment.